You'd think winning the lottery would solve problems, but apparently it just unlocks new ones, like discovering how fast a grown adult can turn millions into confetti. And trust me, the real financial acrobatics haven't even started yet. 1. A man celebrated his lottery win by purchasing what he proudly called his forever home, which turned out to be a neon green mansion shaped like a giant shoe, because he thought living inside a childhood rhyme would make him whimsical instead of deeply unwell. Contractors reported he insisted on adding a 12-foot lace running up the front facade, a rooftop balcony shaped like a heel, and a custom doorbell that played an off-brand nursery jingle so cursed it could legally qualify as a psychological weapon. Naturally, he spent his remaining winnings redecorating the interior with mismatched luxury furniture that looked like it came from a clearance sale at a museum gift shop. And by the time the novelty wore off, as all shoe-related home designs eventually do, he realized he couldn't afford the taxes, the maintenance, or the emotional burden of explaining his address to delivery drivers, leaving the giant footwear monument as a glowing tribute to what happens when architectural freedom meets absolute financial chaos. 2. One woman, armed with unlimited optimism and absolutely no sense of risk, decided her jackpot was the perfect seed money to create a luxury alpaca resort because she believed stressed executives would pay thousands to meditate near animals shaped like angry cotton swabs. She bought the land, built elaborate yurts with heated floors, hired a spiritual grazing consultant, and ordered designer alpaca sweaters for the animals, apparently unaware that alpacas, while adorable, possess the temperament of disgruntled landlords and the digestive grace of lawn equipment. Within months, the herd revolted, chewing through decorative fencing, spitting on clients with sniper-like precision, and escaping during a corporate retreat to chase a CFO across a meadow, turning the dream business into a high-altitude hostage situation financed entirely by lottery money that evaporated faster than her 5-star Yelp reviews, leaving behind nothing but empty yurts and animals who still believed they deserved a union. 3. A newly wealthy man decided the most logical investment was building a pirate-themed restaurant, even though he had never worked a day in food service and thought profit margins referred to the stitching on fancy napkins. He spent millions creating a ship-shaped dining hall complete with animatronic parrots, fog machines, and servers forced to speak in accents so inconsistent they sounded like international criminals. Unfortunately, he forgot two crucial elements: serving edible food and installing proper ventilation. And the entire place became famous not for immersive ambiance, but for smoke clouds that triggered fire alarms hourly and chicken tenders that looked like archaeological discoveries. Customers arrived expecting adventure and left with watery eyes and refund demands. And by the time the health inspector issued a report long enough to qualify as a novella, the owner realized he had managed to sink a ship that wasn't even in water, proving that lottery money can indeed transform fantasy into reality and then immediately into bankruptcy court decor. 4. One winner embraced his inner Hollywood mogul and funded a feature film starring himself as a time-traveling martial artist who fought villains using skills he absolutely did not have, backed by a script he allegedly wrote on a napkin at a Denny's and never revised. He cast non-actors from his hometown, hired a cinematographer who quit halfway through filming after being asked to make the explosions feel more spiritual, and insisted on performing his own stunts despite having the agility of wet cardboard. The production burned money like a malfunctioning fireplace and resulted in a movie so confusing it was screened once at a local theater where audience members left with visible philosophical distress. The film now lives on a forgotten YouTube channel with 7 views, 5 of which are probably the director himself, serving as cinematic proof that dreams funded by sudden wealth are less Oscar-worthy inspiration and more expensive midlife crisis with special effects. 5. A couple decided their big win meant they were destined to become wine moguls, despite knowing as much about viticulture as they did about rocket propulsion. They purchased acres of land, imported rare vines for prices that would make actual experts cry, and hired a consultant based solely on his passionate aura, which turned out to be code for someone who had once smelled a grape and declared it complex. Their first harvest tasted like disappointment soaked in vinegar, and critics described the resulting bottles as aggressively hostile and emotionally exhausting. The couple responded by doubling production, convinced that the market simply wasn't ready for their genius. And by the time the vineyard closed, the only consumers willing to drink the product were people who had lost bets, proving that turning lottery cash into fermented chaos is easier than producing anything remotely drinkable. 6. A man who believed he was destined for greatness used his winnings to create a personal theme park dedicated entirely to himself, complete with animatronic versions of his childhood accomplishments, a gift shop selling merchandise nobody on Earth wanted, and a roller coaster shaped like his signature haircut. He assumed the public would flock to experience his life story. But visitors quickly discovered that the rides were slow, the exhibits were confusing, and the park's only food option was a concession stand selling microwaved nachos priced aggressively as though he expected people to pay for the honor of supporting his ego. Eventually, the park closed after consistently low attendance, leaving behind a deserted shrine to self-importance and credit card transactions so sad they could make economists weep, proving that even with millions, you cannot force society to care about your middle school science fair trophy. 7. One winner became convinced he could revolutionize fashion by launching a luxury clothing line exclusively featuring outfits inspired by his dreams, which sounds poetic until you realize his dreams apparently consisted of neon capes, sequined sweatpants, and jackets that looked like they lost a fight with a disco ball. He insisted the designs represented avant-garde emotional geometry, a phrase critics quickly translated to, "None of this makes sense," and he funneled millions into photo shoots, runway shows, and glossy ads featuring models visibly trying to escape their contracts. Stores refused to carry the brand, customers recoiled on sight, and his warehouse eventually filled with thousands of garments that could only be described as outerwear for unhinged superheroes, leaving him with empty accounts and a fashion legacy best forgotten by both history and fabric. 8. A woman immediately fulfilled her lifelong dream of buying an island, but instead of investing in infrastructure, she spent nearly all her winnings importing exotic birds because she liked the idea of being queen of the parrots. Soon the island wasn't a getaway paradise. It was a feathered dictatorship where hundreds of loud, opinionated birds staged daily screaming festivals, chased guests off the beach, and destroyed anything remotely resembling furniture. Local authorities eventually had to intervene when the parrots began harassing boat traffic like rowdy maritime pirates, and by the time her money ran dry, the woman was left ruling over nothing but squawking chaos and a property value that plummeted so drastically, even realtors refused to list something described as nature's loudest mistake, leaving her with a kingdom that required earplugs, patience, and a tolerance for emotional warfare. 9. One man became obsessed with creating a state-of-the-art doomsday bunker, even though his understanding of emergency preparedness came entirely from action movies and conspiracy forums. He spent millions installing blast doors, surveillance cameras, and a hydroponic garden he never maintained, and he insisted on stocking the bunker with luxury items like a leather sofa, a chocolate fountain, and a custom-built karaoke stage for post-apocalyptic morale. Unfortunately, he forgot the most basic requirement: ventilation, and the entire structure became an airtight underground sauna that engineers described as a very fancy tomb, forcing him to abandon the project and accept that survival requires oxygen, not just cash and delusional optimism fueled by late-night disaster documentaries. 10. A couple decided to travel the world but refused to do so in any normal fashion. They commissioned a custom limousine shaped like a stretch limousine collided with a tour bus and then grew wings, although the wings were purely decorative and served only to confuse airport security. They attempted to drive this monstrosity across multiple continents using a route they designed themselves, which might have worked if they had not assumed that every country had the same road width as suburban America. The limo became lodged in tunnels, stuck under bridges, and once accidentally blocked the entrance to an international border crossing, causing a diplomatic incident so absurd officials refused to comment publicly. The project ended when the vehicle spontaneously collapsed under its own weight, demonstrating that geography, physics, and common sense all have limits. Money cannot buy past. 11. A man who thought he had impeccable taste built a 6-story aquarium mansion, complete with fish tanks in the walls, ceilings, and floors, which would have been impressive if he had hired anyone with marine biology knowledge. Instead, he purchased dozens of incompatible species, including predators and prey, and placed them together in aesthetically pleasing but ecologically disastrous proximity. Homeowners visiting for parties witnessed scenes resembling underwater melodrama as fish chased each other through hallways, and leaks became so constant that contractors started charging him emotional inconvenience fees. Eventually, the mansion was condemned when several tanks ruptured simultaneously, turning the entire structure into a chaotic indoor lagoon that real estate agents described as partially submerged regret, leaving the owner with nothing but soggy furnishings and a newfound respect for ecosystems. 12. A woman spent her winnings creating an elaborate pet spa for her Pomeranian, complete with a gemstone-encrusted treadmill, a personal chef trained at a culinary institute, and a dog therapist she found after a single Google search. The spa offered aromatherapy sessions, guided meditation, and something called paw chakra realignment, which was essentially a stranger touching the dog's feet for $300 an hour. The business failed almost immediately because she forgot that most pet owners do not have a budget equivalent to a small nation's GDP, and the Pomeranian, despite receiving the world's most excessive treatment, seemed unimpressed, choosing instead to bark at ceiling fans and ignore all spiritual enlightenment attempts, proving that even the most pampered pets cannot rescue their owners from poor financial instincts. 13. One winner decided to create a private detective agency, even though his only investigative experience came from binge-watching crime dramas. He purchased expensive trench coats, magnifying glasses for aesthetic reasons, and a fleet of drones he couldn't legally fly, and he hired employees based solely on whether they looked mysterious in low lighting. Unsurprisingly, the agency solved no cases, missed every crucial detail, and once followed the wrong person for an entire week because they had the same vibe. The final blow came when he attempted a dramatic stakeout and fell asleep in his car with the engine running, causing police to mistake him for an abandoned vehicle, ultimately ending his detective career before he ever detected anything except how quickly money disappears when you confuse television with real life. 14. A man funneled his winnings into building what he called an immersive medieval village in his backyard, complete with a moat, a trebuchet, and actors hired to speak exclusively in inconsistent British dialects. He expected tourists to flock to this historical wonderland, but people quickly realized the moat attracted mosquitoes. The trebuchet violated several modern safety laws, and the actors frequently broke character to complain about the heat. The village shut down after a neighbor reported that a stray projectile had landed in their garden shed, and the man was left with a half-finished kingdom where the only loyal subjects were weeds and regret, proving that historical accuracy cannot be achieved by budget alone, especially when the historian in charge gets all his information from fantasy movies. 15. One woman used her jackpot to attempt becoming a world-famous motivational speaker despite having no message beyond money solves everything, which audiences found uncomfortably specific. She rented massive venues, hired pyrotechnics for entrances nobody asked for, and wrote a book consisting mainly of photos of luxury handbags paired with captions about manifesting abundance. Seminars emptied quickly once attendees realized they were receiving financial advice from someone whose strategy consisted solely of win the lottery. And her empire collapsed after she attempted a dramatic on-stage trust fall with no one in position to catch her, symbolizing, quite literally, how hollow her teachings were, leaving behind a pile of unused confetti cannons and a legacy best filed under unintentionally comedic self-help disasters. 16. A man convinced himself he was destined to be the world's most beloved children's entertainer and used his winnings to create a mascot franchise starring a giant purple squirrel named Nutty Buddy, a character he believed would revolutionize youth culture, despite looking like a taxidermy accident wearing sneakers. He poured millions into commercials, plush toys, a theme song that sounded like a fridge humming off-key, and a pilot TV episode so unsettling parents demanded refunds for accidentally exposing their kids to experimental nightmare fuel. After the franchise failed almost instantly, possibly because the squirrel's catchphrase, "Let's nut up and play," raised every imaginable red flag, the creator insisted society simply wasn't ready for his vision, leaving him with warehouses full of plush rodents and a legacy that proves not all cartoon mascots are destined for greatness, especially those born from a jackpot and an unchecked imagination. 17. One winner decided to create a luxury gym that offered emotion-based workouts, which was essentially a series of rooms where clients could lift weights while inspirational quotes flashed on screens like passive-aggressive fortune cookies. He spared no expense, installing marble dumbbells that were unusably heavy, treadmills that displayed your childhood insecurities instead of mileage, and a juice bar selling drinks named things like Repressed Rage Refresher and Citrus Accountability. The gym failed when members realized they didn't want to pay premium prices to be roasted by cardio equipment or reminded that their parents expected more from them, and the owner, who believed he had invented the future of fitness, was forced to watch the business collapse faster than someone fainting during a hot yoga class inside a room designed by someone who confuses mental health with home decor. 18. A woman used her lottery winnings to fund a wildlife sanctuary entirely dedicated to rehabilitating misunderstood raccoons, which sounds wholesome until she decided they needed to be emotionally enriched with nightly concerts performed by struggling musicians hired through classified ads. The raccoons quickly became accustomed to live entertainment and began demanding snacks by banging on metal bowls like furry drummers, and visitors soon discovered that nothing erodes romantic illusions about nature faster than a raccoon mosh pit triggered by an off-key guitarist. After several escape attempts involving coordinated climbs and one raccoon stealing a maintenance worker's keys in what authorities described as shockingly advanced criminal behavior, the sanctuary shut down under the weight of its own chaos, leaving the owner broke, bewildered, and apparently still convinced raccoons respond best to indie folk music performed within clawing distance. 19. One winner blew through a fortune building a Renaissance fair that he insisted must be historically accurate, despite personally knowing less about medieval history than a mall food court night. He hired actors who were given no script beyond "be medieval," resulting in performances where someone spoke with an Australian accent, another quoted space movies, and one insisted on being addressed as Sir Chad of upper management. The fair featured a jousting arena where horses refused to cooperate, a blacksmith demonstration conducted by someone who thought anvils were purely decorative, and a turkey leg vendor who charged gourmet prices for meat that tasted like it had lost a fight with a microwave. The fair lasted 3 weeks before collapsing under financial strain, safety complaints, and the existential despair of attendees who paid full price to watch an accountant in a plastic helmet argue historically inaccurate taxation policy with a man dressed as a wizard. 20. A man obsessed with immortality decided his winnings were best spent funding a cutting-edge cryonics facility housed entirely in a strip mall next to a vape shop, which should have been the first sign something was off. He invested heavily in glossy marketing, portraying himself as a visionary pioneer of eternal life technologies, even though his scientific understanding came from late-night sci-fi movies and a brief skim of online articles. He built freezing pods that looked suspiciously like repurposed tanning beds, hired staff who had never worked in a lab but did own lab coats, and assured clients their molecular future selves would thank them. The business collapsed when a power outage revealed the facility had no backup generator, turning the cryonics dream into a defrosted tragedy that scientists later described as predictable, disappointing, and extremely avoidable, leaving the founder with empty pockets and a reputation colder than any of his machines ever were. 21. A woman decided to revolutionize tourism by creating an immersive time travel hotel where each floor represented a different historical era, but instead of hiring historians, she relied entirely on memory, vibes, and a few costume catalogs. Guests on the ancient Egypt floor found tiki torches, papier-mâché sphinxes, and a soundtrack of whale noises for reasons nobody could explain, while the Victorian England floor featured plastic chandeliers, tea kettles glued to tables, and bellhop uniforms that looked like they were borrowed from a community theater production of Sherlock Holmes. The hotel became famous for confusing guests rather than educating them, and when a history professor publicly described it as an architectural hallucination, bookings plummeted, leaving the owner defending her masterpiece as creatively accurate, which is rich coming from someone whose depiction of the Roman Empire included glow sticks and motivational posters. 22. One winner funneled millions into building the world's largest personal aquarium, even though he lived in a second-floor apartment and believed load-bearing walls were more of a suggestion than a requirement. He installed a massive tank stretching through multiple rooms, filled it with fish that definitely did not belong together, and reassured neighbors that the building was structurally spiritual, a phrase that prompted more panic than reassurance. When the inevitable happened and the tank burst, releasing a biblical flood of saltwater, tropical fish, and decorative coral into the hallway, residents watched their mailboxes float by like sad aquatic beacons, and the owner insisted it was a learning experience, proving that sometimes the only thing deeper than an aquarium is the financial hole someone digs while building one in a space that should never have hosted marine life. 23. A man used his winnings to become an avant-garde philanthropist, which meant donating money only to causes he personally invented, such as sponsoring a scholarship exclusively for left-handed jugglers or funding a grant for emotionally resonant elevator music. He hosted elaborate charity galas featuring silent auctions where the items were conceptual artworks like invisible sculpture and the idea of a sandwich, and guests attended mostly out of confusion. Eventually, nonprofit organizations stopped entertaining him after he attempted to donate a large sum earmarked strictly for research into whether pigeons could be taught to politely nod at pedestrians, leaving him frustrated that the world didn't appreciate his visionary generosity and forcing him to accept that philanthropy usually requires helping real problems rather than creating fictional ones for entertainment. 24. One winner invested in a revolutionary transportation device he insisted would replace bicycles, cars, and walking. But the invention turned out to be a motorized unicycle shaped like a mechanical avocado that required users to balance with the grace of an Olympic gymnast. Testers found it nearly impossible to ride without immediately falling sideways, and the marketing campaign, featuring models pretending not to be terrified, only made the device look like a circus prop masquerading as personal mobility. After several minor accidents and one dramatic collision involving a mailbox, the invention was quietly shelved, and the creator, who believed he was ushering humanity into a sleek new era, had to admit that if technology forces people to sign waivers before trying it, maybe it shouldn't be the future after all. 25. A woman decided her lottery fortune meant she was destined to become a perfume mogul and launched a fragrance line inspired by iconic life moments, resulting in scents with names like First Apartment Carpet, Rainy Breakup Bench, and New Car Smell at Midnight. Reviewers described the perfumes as ranging from confusingly nostalgic to aggressively literal, and customers quickly realized nobody wants to walk around smelling like emotional flashbacks. She doubled down by releasing a limited edition scent called Inspiration After Taxes, which reportedly smelled like citrus mixed with printer toner, and when sales tanked, she blamed the public for failing to embrace olfactory authenticity, proving that just because a memory is meaningful doesn't mean it should be bottled and sprayed onto one's neck. 26. One man invested heavily in opening a high-tech haunted house that relied entirely on malfunctioning animatronics, glitchy holograms, and motion sensors that triggered at completely random times, creating an experience so unpredictable guests weren't sure if they should scream, laugh, or ask for a refund. At one point, the holographic ghost was replaced by an error message displayed in Comic Sans, and an animatronic werewolf broke mid-growl, causing it to sing a monotone hum like a possessed microwave. Visitors left the attraction describing it as emotionally confusing and the world's first accidentally existential haunted house. And the owner, who insisted he was innovating horror, eventually shut down operations after spending more on repairs than he ever earned in ticket sales. 27. A woman spent her winnings trying to create a luxury retreat for burnout recovery, but instead of consulting professionals, she designed it based on inspirational posters and vague memories of spa commercials. The retreat offered activities like guided staring, where guests looked at a wall for 30 minutes, and emotional detox smoothies that tasted like produce purchased exclusively from the clearance bin. She outfitted relaxation rooms with beanbags that deflated instantly and installed fountains that produced sounds suspiciously similar to a clogged sink. Despite charging eye-watering prices, guests described the retreat as a high-budget waiting room, and when her investors backed out, she claimed the world wasn't ready for her wellness revolution, apparently forgetting that wellness generally requires participants to feel at least slightly better afterward. 28. One winner attempted to create the world's most advanced home security system, which was less a system and more a network of gadgets that couldn't agree on anything. Motion sensors triggered when dust floated by, cameras rotated constantly like they were experiencing an existential crisis, and the alarm system activated every time someone sneezed near the driveway. Neighbors became accustomed to hearing sirens at all hours, accompanied by automated voice messages declaring threat level, moderate discomfort, and the owner insisted the glitches were simply proof of cutting-edge sensitivity. The system finally failed spectacularly when it locked him out of his own house for an entire weekend, illustrating that sometimes the biggest threat to home security is the person who spent a fortune trying to reinvent it. 29. A man used his winnings to create a personal museum dedicated entirely to his life's journey. complete with exhibits showcasing his childhood report cards, his collection of novelty socks, and an entire wing devoted to old grocery receipts he considered historically significant. He hired tour guides to deliver dramatic monologues about his shopping habits, installed velvet ropes around mundane objects like a cracked coffee mug, and curated an interactive exhibit titled The Evolution of My Favorite Sandwich. Visitors found the experience baffling, describing it as a museum trapped between self-importance and scrapbooking, and the project ultimately collapsed when he realized the only people willing to tour the museum were those who got lost trying to find the restroom at the building next door, leaving his legacy preserved in a gallery of artifacts nobody asked to see. And that's the grand tour of financial self-destruction. Vote for the dumbest disaster in the comments, because honestly, we're just warming up. Like, subscribe and brace for the next meltdown.